Hello everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this live legal education content, and today will be the day I earn that subscription. For today's story, we are dealing with an amicus brief that has been filed by the people of The Onion in support of a writ of certiorari. This is in the case of Anthony Novak versus City of Parma. Anthony Novak had a parody site, or at least that's the way he describes it, right? He had a parody site making fun of the police department, and the police department was sad. The site wasn't up very long, as I understand it, but then they arrested him for basically impersonating governmental officials, I believe, was the official charge. He was tried and he was acquitted. And he's saying, actually, this is First Amendment retaliation. You don't really think that I was violating the law? You don't really think that I was impersonating anyone? This is just that I said things that you didn't like because I made fun of you, and you're salty about it, and you're now trying to enforce the saltiness with the arrest, and you can't do that. So far, it has not gone great, but there is an appeal, or at least a request, for certiorari before the U.S. Supreme Court to hear this case. And so it is pending the U.S. Supreme Court's consideration. Now, I think it's worth noting, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court grants something like 1 out of every 150 cases. So, not great on your odds, but, this could be one of them. So we'll see. And anyways, it was a hilarious brief, or at least I'm told it was a hilarious brief, because I only heard a couple words of it, which sounded pretty hilarious. And I was like, stop telling me things. I don't want to know more, because I want to cover it myself with you fresh, so my reactions can be genuine, right? So someone's telling me about it, I'm like, you've told me enough things. I'm good. Let's just cover this and see what there is to say. All right. So we are in the United States Supreme Court. This is a real brief that was really filed before the real Supreme Court. It's also satirical at the same time, which is fun. And we'll go ahead and just read this and see what it has to say. This is a writ of a certiorari from the Sixth Circuit, which is where Ohio is. Brief of The Onion as amicus curiae. I'm already having a good time. All right, so we'll skip the table of authorities. Interest of the amicus curiae. The Onion is the world's leading news publication, offering highly acclaimed, universally revered coverage of breaking national, international, and local news events. We're off to a promising start. Rising from its humble beginnings as a print newspaper in 1756, The Onion now enjoys a daily readership of 4.3 trillion. Okay. That would require every person on earth to read The Onion, 500 times every day? Okay. And it's grown into the single most powerful and influential organization in human history. Okay. In addition to maintaining a towering standard of excellence to which the rest of the industry aspires, The Onion supports more than 350,000 full and part-time journalist jobs in numerous news bureaus and manual labor camps around the world. I'm thinking they are doing what the Irish would call taking the piss. I'm getting a bit of that sense here. And its members of its editorial board have served with distinction in advisory capacities for such nations as China, Syria, Somalia, and the former Soviet Union. On top of journalistic pursuits, there's more. The Onion also owns and operates the majority of the world's transoceanic shipping lanes, which doesn't kind of make them pirates. Okay. Stands on the nation's no one owns the shipping lanes themselves. Okay. Anyways, stands on the nation's leading edge of matters of deforestation and strip mining, and proudly conducts tests on millions of animals daily. We believe in the animal testing, and we do it really millions of times. This is going great. The Onion's keen, fact-based reportage has been cited favorably by one or more legal courts. I believe that. I'm sure The Onion has been cited favorably somewhere, sometime, as well as India and China state-run media. I know from time to time, news outlets, including in the United States, have picked up Onion stories as true. So maybe that's what they're referring to there. Along the way, and then they want to make clear that no counsel authored this brief. I think the counsel for the parties is thrilled to make that clear. Along the way, the Onion's journalists have garnered a sterling reputation for accuracy forecasting future events. The Onion does have a disturbing ability to predict the future. What is satire today will be true tomorrow. One such coup was the Onion scoop, revealing that a former president kept nuclear secrets strewn around his beach home basement 3 years before it happened. There's a footnote. C. Mar-a-Lago assistant manager wondering if anyone coming to collect nuclear briefcase from Lost and Found. The Onion, 2017. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. I always had a secret quest that was not filled in my entire time working in my previous job, that I wanted to cite The Onion as prior art. It never happened. I never found it. I cited Wikipedia a couple times, but never The Onion. So the fact that we're citing The Onion in a Supreme Court brief pleases me immensely. I want a job with these lawyers. These are the cool lawyers. These are the lawyers I want to be in my life. Are they hiring? I'm available. The Onion files this brief to protect its continued ability to create fiction that may ultimately merge into reality. True. As the Globe's premier parodists, although the Babylon Bee is giving them a run for their money these days, The Onion's writers also have a self-serving interest in preventing political authorities from imprisoning humorists. Fair? This brief is submitted in the interest of at least mitigating their future punishment. Wow. These guys are my heroes. They're everything I want to be as a lawyer. I didn't know this was an option, but now I do. So if The Onion or the Babylon Bee or Mad Magazine or something needs a lawyer to specialize in appellate briefs and amici briefs, and would like someone who will write something in this sort of milieu, please call me. This is great. Introduction and summary of arguments. Americans can be put in jail for poking fun at the government. This was a surprise to America's finest news source. And an uncomfortable learning experience for its editorial team. Indeed, Ohio police officers arrest, prosecute man who made fun of them on Facebook might sound like a headline ripped from the front pages of The Onion, albeit one that is considerably less amusing because the subjects are real. So when The Onion learned about the Sixth Circuit ruling in this case, it became justifiably concerned. First, the obvious. The Onion's business model was threatened. This was only the latest occasion on which the absurdity of actual events managed to eclipse what the Onion staff could make up. That's hilarious. The Onion's business model of writing satire is threatened by the Sixth Circuit because what they did is actually real, and we are unable to generate anything that's as absurd as what the Sixth Circuit did. Wow, that's such a nice burn. That's such a nice burn. We cannot create fantasies that are as ridiculous as this reality. That's nice. Much more of this, and the front page of The Onion will be indistinguishable from the New York Times. Lol. Second, The Onion regularly pokes its finger in the eyes of representative and authoritative regimes, such as the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, and domestic presidential administrations. So The Onion's professional parodyists were less than enthralled to be confronted with a legal ruling that fails to hold government actors accountable for jailing and prosecuting a would-be humorist simply for making fun of them. If I ever become a U.S. Supreme Court justice, just know that this is the kind of thing that will appeal to me. If you're looking for your writ of certiorari to be granted, right, and you're looking for that Justice Mueller vote, Justice Mueller says yes. We'll hear this case. Why can't the law be fun? Third, the Sixth Circuit ruling imperils at the ancient form of discourse. The court's decision suggests that parodies are in the clear only if they pop the balloon in advance by warning their audience their parody is not true. Yeah, well, you can't really do that. That kind of ruins the joke. But some forms of comedy don't work unless the comedian is able to tell the joke with a straight face. Yeah, me in particular, because I, as many of you guys know, do like a very dry form of comedy, and I find telling jokes in a very serious way to be very funny, because it's like you're riding that line between are you serious and are you funny, right? And that tension is also interesting. And so I like the dry sense of humor. Sort of like, I'm going to say something that's palpably absurd, but I'm going to say it in a serious way, and hopefully you pick up on the fact that it's palpably absurd, and the tension between the apparent seriousness of my delivery and the joke is now more entertaining. But yes, I appreciate that, right? And whether or not that's your sense of humor or not, that's fine. Different people have different senses of humor. But that's what I like. I like a dry sense of humor. I like humor where you're riding the edge between apparent reality and the joke. Well, that's just me. So yeah, if I had to disclaim everything by saying this is a joke, the jokes wouldn't be as funny. But that's, yeah. I depend on the intelligence of my audience and the wisdom of my audience to pick up the fact that I'm making jokes. You can decide amongst yourselves the wisdom of that approach. Parody is a quintessential example. Parodists intentionally inhibit the rhetorical form of their target in order to exaggerate or implode it, and by doing so demonstrate the target's illogic or absurdity. Yeah. Put it simply, for parody to work, it has to plausibly mimic the original. Yeah. Mimic the original. Or, yeah, I mean, you have to invoke the original to have a parody. It has to bring the original to mind, or else it doesn't make any sense. The Sixth Circuit decision in this case would condition the First Amendment protection for parody upon requirement that parodists explicitly say up front their work is nothing more than elaborate fiction. But that would strip parody of the very thing it is to make them function. Yeah, it's dissecting the joke, which always works really well for the humor. All right, when you dissect and explain the joke. Yeah. The Onion cannot stand idly by in the face of the ruling that threatens to disembowel a form of rhetoric that has existed for millennia, that's particularly potent in the realm of political debate, and that purely incidentally forms the basis of the Onion's writers' paychecks. Fair. Okay, I like this introduction. I'm liking this. I'm liking where the Onion is trying to send me. I am amused and entertained and learning all at the same time. This is good. Parody functions by tricking people into thinking it's dumb. Tu stultus es, you are dumb. Wow. These three Latin words have been the Onion's motto and guiding light since it was founded in 1988, so actually when it was really created now. As Americans, so we've gone past the absurdity introduction, and yeah. $5 from Primer says, I like my humor how I like my chicken, dry and tasteless. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Since it was founded in 1988 as America's finest news source, leading its writers towards the paper's singular purpose of pointing out that its readers are deeply gullible people. Some of them are. The Onion's motto is central to this brief for two important reasons. First, it's Latin, and the Onion knows that the federal judiciary is staffed entirely by total Latin dorks. They quote Catilius in its original Latin chambers. They sweetly whisper stare decisis into their spouse's ears. They mutter "Q bono" under their breath while picking up after their neighbors' dogs. So the Onion knew unless it pointed to a suitable Latin rallying cry, its brief would be operating far outside the court's vernacular. I feel very seen and very judged right now. I feel very seen and very judged. Relationships with me may or may not include me whispering stare decisis into your ear from time to time. Let's press on. The second reason, perhaps mildly more important, is the phrase "you are dumb" captures the very heart of parody, tricking readers into believing that they're seeing a serious rendering of some specific form, a pop song lyric, a newspaper article, a police beat, and then allowing them to laugh at their own gullibility when they realize they've fallen victim to one of the oldest tricks in the history of rhetoric. The very nature of parody is to catch the reader off guard at first glance, after which the victim recognizes the joke is on him to the extent it caught him unaware. Appreciate it. It is a really old trick. The word parody stretches back into the Hellenic world. It originates in the prefix para, meaning alteration, and the suffix ode, referring to the poetry form known as an ode. I did not know that. An alteration of an ode. Okay, well, I actually learned something from the Onion today. That's disturbing. One of the earliest practitioners was the 1st century BC poet Horace, whose satires would replicate the exact form known as this ode, mimicking its meter, its subject matter, even its self-serious tone, but tweaking it ever so slightly so the form was able to mock its own idiocies. Respect. This is not a mere linguistic anecdote. The point is, instead, that without the capacity to fool someone, parody is functionally useless. Deprived of the tools inscribed in its very etymology that allow it again and again to perform this rhetorical, powerful sleight of hand, it adopts a particular form in order to critique it from within. Respect. Parody leverages the expectations that are created in its readers when they see something written in a particular form. This could be anything, but for the sake of brevity, let's assume that's a newspaper headline. Maybe one written by the Onion that begins the familiar way: Supreme Court rules, ... Already one can see how this works as a parodic setup, leading readers to think they're reading a newspaper story with just 3 words. The Onion has mimicked the dry tone of an Associated Press news story. Nice burn on the Associated Press, aping the clip's climax syntax and subject matter. The Onion could go even further by putting that headline on its website, which features a masthead Latin motto, and the designers of which parodies the aesthetics of major news sites, further selling the idea this is actually a news story. Maybe you could, the Onion. Maybe you could. Of course, what moves this into the realm of parody is when the Onion completes the headline with the punchline, the thing that mocks the newspaper format. The Onion could do something like, Supreme Court rules, Supreme Court rules. The Onion could push the parody even further by writing the joke out. We are literally explaining the joke right now. Wow. This is a moment. We are explaining the joke, and it's funny. I didn't even know that was possible. We are explaining the joke, and it's actually funny as we're doing it. That's hilarious. The Onion could push the parody even further by writing a joke out in article format, say a quote from justices in the majority, opining that while the United States Constitution guarantees equality of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, it most definitely does not guarantee the equality of coolness, and rounding off the reporting, the Supreme Court holding that the court rules and rules totally, all worthy and touched by nobody, in perpetuity, and in accordance with the Article 3 of the Constitution. The ability of the President and Congress to keep pace with us is not only separate, but most unequal. And that is, not so much fiction as a description of what they actually wrote in 1997. Wow. As can be seen, the Associated Press form is followed straight through the article. That rhetorical form sets up the reader's expectations for how the idiom will play out. Expectations that are jarringly juxtaposed with the contents of the article. The power of the parody arises from the dissonance in which the reader has been drawn. That's a very sophisticated explanation of parody. Here's another. Assume you are reading what appears to be a boring economics paper about the Irish overpopulation crisis of the 18th century. And yet, strangely enough, it seems to advocate for solving the dilemma by cooking and eating babies. That seems a bit cruel until you realize that you are in fact reading a modest proposal. Yeah. To be clear, The Onion is not trying to compare itself to Jonathan Swift. Its writers are far more talented, and their output will be read long after that hack Swift has been lost to the sands of times. Press X to doubt. But I appreciate your hubris. Still, The Onion and its writers share with Swift a common goal of replacing a form precisely in order to critique it from within. That leverage of form, the mimicry of particular idiom in order to heighten dissonance between form and content is what generates parody's rhetorical power. If parody did not deliver the advantage, then no one would use it. Everyone would simply draft straight, logical, uninspiring legal briefs instead. Holy shit. First of all, The Onion, I do have to challenge you a little bit on that. All right, wow. I didn't even notice the thing was running through the thing. I have to fix that. But first of all, The Onion, that is just not fair. There are as many great briefs that are straight and logical and very inspiring. We've read some of them together, you and I. We've read many a great argument. We've read many a great Supreme argument that is perfectly straight and logical and also inspiring. So I mean, but nice burn on the entire legal profession, I guess. Because parody mimics the real thing, it has a unique capacity to critique the real thing. Importantly, parody provides functionality and value to the writer or social commentary that might not be possible, say, by simply stating the critique outright and avoiding all confusion. Fair? Parody can do things that are not necessarily present by other methods. Parody is not unique in its ability to spread messages, but its means provide particular advantages to other means versus the straight, logical. The parody can also provide some benefits. One of parody's most powerful capacities is rhetorical. It gives the power of ability to mimic the voice of a serious authority, whether that's dry newspeak of the Associated Press or legalese of majority court opinion, and thereby kneecap the authority from within. $5 from Philip Isaiah. Thank you very much for your Fox giving me a thumbs up. It is appreciated. Thank you. Parodists can take apart an authoritarian cult of personality, point out rhetorical tricks that politicians use to mislead their constituents, and even undercut the government's institutions of real-world attempts at propaganda. Time and again, that has occurred in The Onion. In 2012, for example, The Onion proclaimed Kim Jong-un was the sexiest man alive. China's state-run news agency republished The Onion story as true, alongside a slideshow of the dictator himself in all of his glory. The Fars Iranian news agency uncritically picked up and ran with The Onion's headline, Gallup poll ruled whites prefer Amina Jamin to Obama. Domestically, the number of elected leaders who are still incapable of parsing the Onion's coverage as satire is daunting, but one particular example stands out. Republican Congressman John Fleming, who believed they need to warn his constituents of dangerous escalations of pro-choice movement after reading the Onion's headline, Planned Parenthood opens $8 billion abortion plex. I remember that. That was a long time ago, but I remember that. It's an old meme, but it checks out. The point of all this is not that it's funny when deluded figures of authority mistake satire for actual news, even though that can be extremely funny. Rather, it's that the parody allows these figures to puncture their own sense of self-importance by falling for what any reasonable person would recognize as an absurd escalation of their own views. In political context, the effect can be particularly pronounced. Nothing is more thoroughly democratic than to have a high and mighty lampooned and spoofed. Yeah, there's some truth to that somewhere. A reasonable reader does not need a disclaimer to know parody is a parody. When in doubt, the reasonable man test can come to the point, right? How do we solve this problem? The reasonable man test, right? Some people are stupid. Some people will be fooled, including some people who are in Congress. But what would the reasonable man know? The reasonable man knows better. The reasonable man is not a congressman. He's a reasonable man. Okay. At bottom, parody functions by catering to a reasonable reader, one who can tell, even after being tricked at first, that parody is not real. If the most robust standards of parody didn't live up to this standard, there'd be nothing funny about the Chinese government believing that the pudgy dictator like Kim Jong-un was the sexiest man on earth. Everyone would just agree that it was perfectly reasonable for them to be taken in by the headline. The law turns on the same reasonable person construct. The reasonable reader test, the reasonable man test is always good, right? It's framed slightly differently, but it's the reasonable man test, where it's the reasonable barber, the reasonable policeman, or the reasonable journalist, or the reasonable whatever. It's like always, it's the reasonable man test. It's just the ordinary man of ordinary common prudence and understanding. He rides a bus to get to and from work. He's not so poor that he can't afford to ride the bus. He's not so illiterate that he can't understand timetables, but he does understand timetables. He's able to get to the bus. He knows how to pay for the bus. He knows how to make change, to ride the bus, to follow it and make changes between different buses to get to where he needs to be, all in an increment's time. Right? Riding a bus requires a lot of different tasks, but most of us manage it. So that's who we're looking for, that guy. The reasonable reader test gauges whether a statement can be reasonably interpreted as stating actual facts, thereby ensuring that neither the least humorous nor most credulous audience dictates the boundaries of protected speech. The reasonable man test is great for this and many other purposes. A parody enjoys First Amendment protection, notwithstanding that not everyone will get the joke. We need to tell that to people on Twitter. They need to learn that, perhaps more than anyone. And a reasonable reader is no dullard. He or she does not represent the lowest common denominator, but reasonable intelligence and learning. He or she can tell the difference between satire and sincerity. Nor is the reasonable person some totally humorous drudge who cannot perceive the presence of subtle invective. Instead, the reasonable reader perspective is more informed by an assessment of her well-constructed view than by her immediate yet transitory reaction, particularly in light of special characteristics of satire, which levy that transient reaction for rhetorical effect. Context matters, but even poorly executed parody is ordinarily susceptible to the intellectual grasp of a reasonable reader. Reasonable readers do not need to be told explicitly what they have no serious trouble figuring out for themselves. And until the Sixth Amendment decision, that's exactly what most courts have held. Some courts have expressly held that disclaimers aren't required for parody to be protected. Campbell, for example, noted, there's no reason to require parody to state the obvious or even the reasonably perceived. U.S. Supreme Court. There's no requirement that cover of a parody carry a disclaimer that's not produced by the subject of the parody, and we ought to not find such a requirement. Other courts have held that parody published without disclaimer is nonetheless protected. For example, NYSE versus Gary. The district court found it entirely plausible that no one in their right mind would believe the defendant, who posted obscene and vulgar messages online under the persona Richard Grasso, was the real-life Richard Grasso, the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange. Yeah. The court in New York Times similarly rejected the notion that the absence of a disclaimer was dispositive, noting that the reasonable reader had other obvious clues that an article was parody when it reported that a 6-year-old girl was being prosecuted for her book report on Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, and included a photo of the small child holding a stuffed animal captioned, "Do they make handcuffs this small? Be afraid of this little girl." I think I could have seen through that one. No reasonable reader would have been deceived by a memorandum purportedly written by a judge that declared a certain legal newspaper contraband, announced a chambers by chamber search for copies of the publication, advised fellow judges and employees to conduct their amorous escapades elsewhere while the search was being conducted, and declared the judge's intent to suspend the election of his successor and remain in office indefinitely. Well, yeah, I mean, that's, fair. In this case, by contrast, the Sixth Circuit ruled that the defendant's officers could reasonably believe that some of Novak's Facebook activity was not parody because Mike Novak deleted comments that made clear the page was fake. But the lack of an explicit disclaimer makes no difference whether a reasonable reader would discern the speech was parody. Yeah. Just to be clear, this was not a close call on the facts. Mr. Novak's spoof Facebook post advertised that the Parma Police Department was holding a P-word reform event in which successful participants could be removed from the sex offender registry and become honorary members of the department, nice, after completing puzzles and quizzes. That could happen at some point in the real world. It's only parody for the moment, right? That the department had discovered an experimental technique for abortions and would be providing them to teens for free in a police van. That the department was soliciting job applicants, but the minorities were strongly encouraged not to apply. And the department was banning city residents from feeding homeless people in an attempt to have our homeless population eventually leave our city due to starvation. Although, to be fair, some places do ban feeding the homeless. So, can't speak to the legality of those laws, but just noting. True, not all humor is equally transcendent, but the quality and taste of the parody is irrelevant. And there's no real doubt that reasonable readers would have no difficulty ascertaining that Parma's finest were not actually providing free abortions to teen and police vans, pardoning child sex offenders on the basis of their aptness of puzzles, or intentionally starving the homeless. The absence of a disclaimer lends nothing to the analysis. Yeah, the Parma police have a humor problem. They don't like being poked fun of. And if they have some issues, so yeah. Under a proper understanding of the reasonable reader test, a disclaimer not only spoils the punchline, but it's redundant. The Sixth Circuit holding stands alone among otherwise uniform approach courts have taken, and not in a good way. It should be obvious that parodists cannot be prosecuted for telling a joke with a straight face. God bless America, man, because if you were prosecuted for telling a joke with a straight face, man, my sense of humor would take a massive blow. This is the 15th page of a convoluted legal filing intended to deconstruct the societal implications of parody, so the reader's attention almost certainly wandering. That is understandable. So here's a paragraph of gripping legal analysis to ensure that every jurist who reads this brief is appropriately impressed by the... Okay, this is gonna not go well, but we're gonna give it a shot. So here's a paragraph of gripping legal analysis to ensure that every jurist who reads this brief is appropriately impressed by the logic of its argument and the lucidity of its prose. Bona vencida, den bonus asperistis, writ of certiorari, de minimis, jus ascerendi, forum non conveniens, corpus juris, ad hominem tuc coque, post hoc ergo propter hoc, quid est demonstratum, actus reus, scandalia magnatum, pactum reservae domini. Wow. See what happened? The brief itself went from a I'm writing this person and I'm asking if they're hiring. I'm sending them a letter. Maybe I'll send them a parody job application. I wonder if that would be good. Maybe I could work on a parody resume. Okay, I'll give it some shot. See what happened? This brief itself went from a discussion of parody's functions and the quite serious historical and legal arguments in favor of a strong protection of parodic speech to a curveball mocking the way legalese can both be impenetrably boring and belie the hollowness of the legal profession. That's a setup and a punchline idea again. It would not have worked out quite as well if this brief had said the following. Hello there, reader. We're about to write an amicus brief about the value of parody. Buckle up because we're going to be doing some fairly outre things, including commenting on the text for itself. If I make a parody CV, make a parody video about it, that can be good. Yeah, okay. We'll work on it. Taking the latter route would have spoiled the joke and come off as a bit more stodgy. But more importantly, it would have disarmed the power that comes with the form devouring itself. For millennia, this has been the rhyme of parody. The author convinces the readers they're reading the real thing, then pulls out the rug from them from jokes. Wait a second. At this point, at this point, now we're getting really, really meta. Is this a parody brief? Is this a real beef brief? Is it both? Is it real and parody both at the same time? How meta is this? It's like it's a snake eating its own tail. I'm very confused right now. The author The author convinces the reader they're reading the real thing, then pulls the rug out from them the jokes. The heart of this form lies in the jive and take between the serious setup and ridiculous punchline. As Mark Twain put it, the humorous story is told gravely. The teller does his best to conceal the fact that even dimly suspects there anything funny about it. Not only is the Sixth Circuit on the wrong side Twain, but grafting onto the reasonable reader test a requirement that parodists explicitly declaim their own pretense to reality is a disservice to the American public. It assumes that ordinary readers are less sophisticated and more humorous than they actually are. Ender Fall says, is it all just parody? Always was? Respect. Oh yeah, this is very, very filed. This is very, very filed. Yeah. And the stakes here are significant, involving no less than one of the many or less equally important components of social and political discord. Rhetorical hyperbole has traditionally added much to the discourse of our nation. Although parody is often offensive and nevertheless deserving of substantial freedom, both as entertainment and as a form of social and literary criticism. This court has traditionally been hesitant. $5 from JoJo6178 ID 10TS. Thanks. Yeah. That's what's going on. Thank you, JoJo. The court has traditionally been hesitant to chill speech, and the prospect of chilling parody by imprisoning its practitioner provides equal cause for caution. What may be difficult to communicate or understand when factually reported may be poignant and powerful if offered as satire. The last thing we need, the last thing the First Amendment will tolerate, is a law that lets public figures keep the people from mocking them. Fair. The Onion intends to continue its societally valuable role, bringing disinfectant of sunlight into the halls of power. And it would vastly prefer that sunlight not be used to measure out its writers in 15-minute increments in an exercise yard. Wow. Okay. Conclusion. The best lawyers ever. The petition for certiorari should be granted, the rights of the people vindicated, and the various historical wrongs remedied. The Onion will welcome any one of the three, particularly the first. Respectfully submitted. Some people who kick ass at the law firm of Miller Johnson, apparently. Thus, that brings us to the end of the brief. Well, I enjoyed this all the way through. It appeals to my sense of humor. It makes an excellent legal case in a humorous way. It's everything you could want for in a case, and I think it's great. And if Miller Johnson out there sees this video and wants more people to help write more briefs with a certain flair for the humorous, dramatic, and slightly irreverent, I can do that. I am definitely very available. So I just all that stuff. So thank you all for coming by for this live stream. This was fun. I'm sad the brief is over now because it was so much fun, but you know, the joke is over. Let's just be happy it happened instead of sad that it's gone. If you have enjoyed this stream, please remember to do all the YouTubey things. May I first of all counsel your eyes to the subscribe button. Is the subscribe button currently red? If the subscribe button is currently red, it is angry with you. But it wants to be a calm, peaceful button. Like the background of my living room wants to be calm, peaceful. And it expresses its calm and peace in the color gray. So if you click on the red subscribe button, it will stop being an angry subscribe button and will become a calm, peaceful subscribe button. It was always meant to be. So please be sure to click that red subscribe button today. Please remember to hit the like button. And did you know for a mere 99 cents, you too can become an uncivilian? It's true. If you become an uncivilian, you will get your name on screen. As I finally figured out how to get all the names on screen. It took long enough, but I figured it out. So you get your name on screen, just like all these fine people did. And you also get scales by your name in the chat. And also you get to feel just that much better about yourself, that you are one of the uncivilians and you have the scales by your name. And you get to feel just that much better about yourself vis-a-vis all the people who don't have the scales by their name because they are not as cool as you, the uncivilians. So remember to do all those things until later. Until later, my friends, I hope all is well. Cheers, my friends, and goodbye.